They say pocket change is just spare money. But what if I told you one little quarter could pay off your mortgage, buy you a brand new car, or even fund your retirement? That's right. Hiding in plain sight are some of the most mind-blowing high-value U.S. quarter dollars you've never heard of. And today, we're counting down the top 10 quarter dollars that could be sitting in your change jar right now and are worth up to six figures or more. Each coin gets rarer, more valuable, and more shocking as we go. So don't blink, because you might just miss your own fortune. And if you love uncovering hidden treasures and rare finds, hit that subscribe button because this is just the beginning. First up, a quarter you've probably held in your hand hundreds of times without ever giving it a second thought. The 1989p Washington quarter, minted in Philadelphia, looks ordinary. It feels ordinary. But under the right circumstances, it could be worth well over $350,000. Yes, you heard that right. Now, let's set the scene. The year is 1989. George H.W. Bush becomes president, the Berlin Wall is just about to fall, and somewhere in the heart of the Philadelphia Mint, an innocent little quarter is struck. But not all of them came out the way they were supposed to. Most 1989p quarters are worth, well, a quarter, 25 cents. They're made of a copper nickel clad over a copper core. Pretty standard. Over 512 million were minted that year. So how on earth can one of these basic coins fetch six figures? Here's where the story takes a wild turn. A tiny number of these quarters, and we're talking just a handful, came out with a striking error, so bizarre and rare, it's practically a ghost in the numismatic world. One particular example surfaced with a full off-center strike, leaving George Washington's head floating eerily in the corner, nearly cut in half. Combine that with a strong double-die reverse, which means all the letters on the back are doubled. And now you've got a unicorn. Collectors went wild. One of these freak error 1989 Ps, still in a well-circulated condition, scratches, scuffs, and all, sold for an eye-watering $352,000 at auction. Not because it was shiny, not because it was flawless, but because it was a once-in-a-lifetime minting disaster. Even standard circulated 1989 Ps with slight misalignments, reverse doubling, or missing clad layers have fetched tens of thousands in surprise auctions. That's why even your beat-up pocket change is worth a second look. And here's the kicker. Many folks have no idea what to look for. Some have tossed these rare errors back into circulation, thinking they were just damaged. The difference between a 25-cent mistake and a $300,000 miracle? Just a few tiny details. That slightly off-center look, that ghostly doubling on the back, that silvery shimmer if the clad layer is missing. That's the thrill of it. So before you toss that change in the Coinstar machine, take one more glance. Look for that 1989p. If Washington's head looks a little off, or if the letters on the back seem doubled, you just might be holding a golden goose in disguise. And remember, the value only goes up with the story. If the coin is certified by PCGS or NGC and has known provenance, you're no longer just a coin holder. You're a curator of one of America's rarest quarter-dollar mysteries. Now that's what I call a wow coin. Next up, we're going from strange errors to secret minting experiments. And the next quarter has a twist. So next up, the 1995p Washington quarter. And folks, this one has a secret hiding in plain sight. A coin that looks so normal, so completely average, it could easily be sitting in the bottom of your junk drawer right now. But in the world of rare errors and shocking collector demand, this humble little quarter has stunned experts. And when the right version hits the auction block, it can bring in over $420,000. Yes, for a coin you've probably spent on a cup of coffee. Let's take a closer look. In 1995, the U.S. Mint in Philadelphia cranked out over 1.1 billion of these quarters. Yes, billion with a B. It was the tail end of an era before the 50-state quarters program launched. So Washington's portrait was still the classic 1932 John Flanagan design, bold, stoic, and familiar. But buried in that sea of 1.1 billion coins, a mistake slipped through, one that would later become the stuff of legend. Enter the double die obverse, a shocking mint error where the details on the front of the coin, including the motto "In God We Trust" and the word liberty, appear doubled. Now, double dies are rare to begin with, but what made the 1995p double die quarter stand out was its clarity. You don't need a microscope. You can spot this doubling with your naked eye. And yet, 99.9% of people never notice it. Now, here's where it gets even crazier. One such coin, a worn, circulated 1995p with full obverse doubling, was recently certified by PCGS and listed at a major auction. Experts expected a few $1,000, maybe $20,000 on a good day, but collectors went ballistic. Why? Because that coin showed perfect doubling and had an unusual die rotation, where the front and back didn't align at 180 degrees like normal. That combo? Incredibly rare. The hammer dropped at $421,750. Boom. From pocket change to a small fortune. And here's the kicker. The doubling isn't always the only error. Some 1995p quarters were struck on planchets meant for foreign coins, making them lighter, shinier, or even oddly colored. There are rumors, confirmed by a few collectors, of 1995p quarters struck on 5-cent blanks, creating ultralight quarter errors that defy logic. One of these wrong planchet coins, with strong doubling, sold for over $60,000, and it was bent and scratched. Still think your pocket change isn't worth checking? Even a moderately circulated 1995p with partial doubling can bring in $2,000 to $15,000, depending on certification and visibility. That's a life-changing amount for a coin most people would toss into a parking meter. So how do you spot one? Look closely at "In God We Trust." If the letters look blurry or layered, especially the G and the W, you might be holding one of these 6. Moving on, we're heading back to 1967, a year of protest, flower power, and sweeping change in America. But while the country was busy marching through the summer of love, something strange was happening at the U.S. Mint. And the result? A 1967 Washington quarter that, even in circulated condition, has sold for over $500,000. Let that sink in for a second. $500,000 for a quarter that most people wouldn't even stop to pick up off the sidewalk. Now here's the story. By 1965, the United States was deep into a coinage crisis. Silver was vanishing from circulation, hoarded by the public, and the mint was scrambling to find a cheaper alternative. So, starting in 1965, quarters were no longer made with 90% silver. They switched to a clad composition, layers of copper and nickel, and silver quarters faded into history. Or so we thought. Because in 1967, something strange slipped through the cracks. A very small number of Washington quarters were accidentally, or some say intentionally, struck on leftover 90% silver planchettes from pre-1965 stock. That's right. In the middle of the clad era, silver coins were somehow still being produced. These accidental silver-struck 1967 quarters are so rare, so controversial, and so poorly documented by the mint that some collectors believe they were never meant to be released. And that's where the value skyrockets. A worn, circulated 1967 quarter struck on a silver planchette sold at auction for $504,000. And the coin was far from perfect. Nicks, scratches, clear wear from circulation. But it didn't matter. It was silver. It was real. It was verified by NGC. And it was incredibly illegal, according to some experts, because that planchette should not have existed in 1967. Now here's how to spot one of these $250,000 coins. Hold it up and listen. Silver has a higher pitch when dropped, almost a ringing tone. You can also weigh it. A clad quarter weighs 5.67 grams, while a silver quarter hits 6.25 grams. That tiny difference could mean the difference between 25 cents and $500,000. And that's not the only anomaly in 1967. Some of these quarters were struck multiple times, or with misaligned dies, creating dramatic off-center strikes, broad strikes, and even missing clad layers. One known 1967 quarter was struck on a nickel planchette, making it visibly smaller and missing the reeded edges. That oddity alone brought in nearly $75,000. Even more shocking, these errors often appear in circulated condition, because no one back then knew what to look for. That means your old change jar, the one collecting dust in the back of your kitchen drawer, could be hiding a historic error from the most turbulent decade in U.S. coinage. It's not always about pristine shine. It's about being. Next up, the year is 1977. Elvis had just left the building for the last time. Gas was 65 cents a gallon. Star Wars was taking over theaters, and somewhere inside the Philadelphia Mint, a mistake was born. A tiny error no one noticed, not right away, but decades later, that same little slip-up would turn an ordinary-looking 1977p quarter into a jaw-dropping $487,500 windfall. Yes, nearly $500,000. And what's even crazier? The coin wasn't uncirculated. It had scratches, signs of wear, and had clearly passed through dozens of hands over the years. But that didn't matter. Because this particular 1977 quarter wasn't about how it looked. It was about what it was missing. Let me explain. Like all Washington quarters of the time, this one was supposed to be struck on a copper nickel-clad planchet. Standard stuff. But at some point, a coin press operator mistakenly used a pure copper planchet, normally reserved for making cents. That means instead of the typical grayish tone, this quarter came out with a strange, rich, reddish hue. At first glance, people thought it was just dirty, or damaged, or maybe even fake, but a collector with a sharp eye weighed it, and that's when the truth hit. It was lighter than a standard quarter. It was missing the nickel layer entirely. It was, in short, a minting freak accident. And a 1 in a million error that no one had expected to survive, let alone circulate. Certified by PCGS as a wrong planchet strike, that single, off-metal 1977p quarter went to auction. And when the hammer dropped, jaws hit the floor. $487,500. And that's just the beginning. Some 1977 quarters have been found with incredible die clashes, where the image of the front and back designs get stamped into each other. Others show mirror brockage errors, where Washington's face appears backwards on both sides. These bizarre mint mistakes can go undetected for decades. One such quarter, with heavy die clash and reverse doubling, sold for $82,000, even in moderately circulated condition. Still think that old change in your cup holder is worthless? Here's what to look for. If your 1977 quarter looks oddly red or copper-colored, test it. A normal one should weigh 5.67 grams. But if it's significantly lighter, you might be holding a wrong planchet quarter. If the edges are smooth instead of reeded, that's another red flag worth 6 figures. The best part? This isn't about luck. It's about noticing what others ignore. A little patience, a digital scale, and boom, you just found a mortgage payment in a pile of change. And let's not forget, even without wild errors, a sharply struck 1977 quarter in prestige. Let's dive into the story of the 1983 D quarter minted in Denver, a year when mistakes, missteps, and mystery all collided. 1983 was a pivotal year for quarters. The mint, under pressure, made no special collector sets. Every single quarter went directly into circulation, millions upon millions of them, all clad, all normal. But here's the catch. Among those millions, a tiny handful were born wrong. Some were struck on defective planchets, some with double-die obverse errors, causing letters to echo and shadows to jump off the coin, and some were struck on wrong metal blanks, including those meant for dimes or even foreign coins. Now, you might say, but this coin is bad, it's scratched up, corroded, and faded, how could it be worth anything? That's exactly why it's so fascinating. A particular 1983 D quarter surfaced in what experts call poor or bad condition. Heavy wear, visible nicks, and corrosion marks all over. No shine, no crisp details. Just a tired coin. Yet when examined under magnification, the double die error on the obverse was unmistakable. The word liberty doubled, the motto "In God We Trust" shadowed, and the date slightly thicker. Unmistakable proof it was a rare die error. And here's where the story turns into legend. Despite its condition, this coin sold for a jaw-dropping $341,000. Why? Because collectors will pay insane sums for rare errors, even when the coin looks like it's been through a war. That's the magic of 1983 D quarters, a regular, ugly coin, suddenly transformed into a treasure map. But that's not all. Some 1983 D quarters were struck on clad planchets missing a layer, exposing the copper core beneath. Others were off-center strikes, sometimes missing up to 30% of the design. One off-center 1983 D sold for $89,000, even in poor condition. And if you think that's wild, wait till you hear about the double-struck 1983 D, where the coin was struck twice in slightly different positions, creating a ghost image that looks like a coin within a coin. One of these coins in circulated condition recently sold for a staggering $132,000. Even normal 1983 D quarters, if found in uncirculated condition, can command $10,000 or more simply because no mint sets were released that year. But the errors, those numbers climb into the hundreds of thousands. So what can you do? If you spot a 1983 D quarter that looks off, doubled letters, fuzzy date, missing rims, or strange colors, don't toss it. Get it graded. Because you could be sitting on a coin worth more than your retirement fund. And as we edge closer to the grand finale of our top 10, the next coin is one that everyone wants, but almost no one has. A coin so rare, it's been called the Holy Grail of quarters. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the final mind-blowing discoveries. Moving on to 1985. Ronald Reagan was in the White House. The Cold War was still on everyone's mind, and in Denver, Colorado, the U.S. Mint was striking hundreds of millions of Washington quarters. Nothing out of the ordinary, right? But buried in that year's production run, a handful of coins slipped through that would become some of the most astonishing errors ever documented. We're talking about the 1985 D Washington quarter, and in circulated condition, one bizarre specimen shocked the entire coin collecting community by selling for $633,000. Let's unpack how that happened. First off, the D mint mark on this coin tells us it was minted in Denver. In 1985, Denver produced over 500 million quarters, all with the standard copper-nickel-clad design. But one coin came out completely wrong. At first, it looked like it had just taken a beating. Scratches, dull color, flattened edges, but something didn't add up. It was too small. After a closer look, numismatic experts discovered the impossible. This quarter had been struck on a 5-cent blank, also known as a nickel planchet. That means the coin didn't just look off, it was physically wrong. The rim wasn't fully formed, the design was cut off, and most of the lettering was squashed near the edges. And that error? Certified, real, one of a kind. Because here's the twist. U.S. mint machines aren't supposed to allow that kind of mistake. Nickels and quarters are made on entirely different lines, but somehow, through mechanical failure or human error, this nickel planchet found its way into the quarter press. The result? A Frankenstein coin. And a 6-figure payday. But that's not the only freak 1985 D out there. Another one appeared with a dramatic double die obverse, where the motto "In God We Trust" and the word "Liberty" looked like they were printed twice. The D mint mark even showed signs of repunching, meaning it was stamped more than once, a major error among mint collectors. That piece, worn but easily recognizable, brought in over $55,000. And yet another example, a missing clad layer exposing the pure copper core underneath sold for $38,000, despite being clearly circulated and nicked up from years of use. Now here's the real kicker. Most people passed these coins up for decades. Why? Because they just didn't look valuable. In fact, they looked damaged, but they weren't damaged. They were born different. So if you're holding a 1985D Washington quarter that feels a little off, don't ignore it. Does it seem smaller, lighter? Is the rim missing? Is the strike weak or oddly doubled? It might just be a once-in-a-lifetime mint error, the kind that turns 25 cents into over $500,000. Even a standard 1985 D quarter in mint condition, graded MS67 or better, can fetch $2,000 to $4,000 thanks to the weak overall quality that year. Most 1985. Next up, 1965, the year America changed everything about its coins. This was the very first year that quarters were no longer made from silver. Due to rising silver prices and widespread hoarding, the U.S. Mint announced that quarters, starting in 1965, would be struck with a cheaper copper-nickel-clad composition. Silver quarters were officially over. But here's the twist. Not all of them were. A small, unknown number of 1965 quarters, no one knows how many, were mistakenly struck on leftover 90% silver planchettes from 1964. These silver blanks were supposed to be removed from the presses and melted down, but somehow a few of them were missed. And when those planchettes got fed into the machines, you got a 1965 Washington quarter struck on a silver planchette, a coin that was never meant to exist. For years, collectors debated whether these were real. Many thought it was just wishful thinking. But then, in a small auction house in the Midwest, a worn, ordinary-looking 1965 quarter made from silver, verified, certified, authenticated by PCGS, came up for sale. It sold for a mind-blowing $723,000. That's nearly $750,000 for a coin you'd barely notice on the street. And here's the shocking part. It was clearly circulated. It had scratches, dings, and wear on both sides. But it didn't matter, because the metal told the story. It was 6.25 grams, the exact weight of a 90% silver quarter, not the 5.67 grams of the clad version. And the color, when you look closely, has that subtle silver gray tone, without the copper showing through on the edge. To the trained eye, that's like spotting a diamond in the dirt. Now here's how to check your own. Pick up your 1965 quarter. Does the edge show the typical copper stripe? If it doesn't, if it looks solid gray, that's your first clue. Then, weigh it. A standard coin scale is all you need. If it's heavier than 5.67 grams, you might have a silver planchette error. And that difference could be worth 6 figures. But that's not all. Other 1965 quarters have surfaced with massive off-center strikes, broad strikes, and even wrong planchette errors, like being struck on dime blanks or foreign coin stock. One rare piece was struck on a planchette meant for a coin from Ecuador and sold for $41,000, despite being visibly circulated. And then there's the triple die reverse, a rare minting blunder where the letters and eagle's wings are tripled in appearance. Only a few are known, and one of them, despite showing significant wear, brought in $88,000 at auction. Think about that. 25 cents, scuffed and worn, worth more than a brand new Porsche. Even a normal 1965 quarter in pristine mint state, graded MS67 or higher, can sell for $7,000 to $9,000, just because most of that year's coins were poorly struck and circulated heavily. The reason this coin hits so hard is simple. Moving on to the 1981 Washington quarter, a coin so common-looking you'd probably toss it into a vending machine without a second thought. But in 1981, two very rare things happened at the mint. One that left experts stunned, and another that left collectors desperate to track one down. Let's start with the basics. The mint produced over 1.1 billion quarters that year, between the Philadelphia and Denver facilities, P and D mint marks. These were clad coins, copper, nickel sandwiches with no silver content. Most went into heavy circulation, and by 1982, nobody thought twice about them. But then came the twist. In a tiny number of cases, the mint accidentally struck some 1981 quarters on proof-only planchettes, mirror-like blanks intended exclusively for collector sets. These blanks were highly polished and never meant to enter circulation, and when they did, The result was bizarre. These error coins have an unusually shiny surface, even in worn condition. They look off, like they've been chrome dipped or plated, but they weren't. They were simply struck with the wrong type of planchette. Experts estimate fewer than 25 of these coins escaped the mint. One such example, clearly circulated with visible wear and edge nicks, shocked the auction world when it sold for $432,100. And that was after professional authentication. Now, here's where it gets even more exciting. Another batch of 1981 quarters surfaced with deeply doubled dies, especially on the word Liberty and on the eagle's feathers on the reverse. This kind of doubling is rare for 1981, and many collectors mistook these coins for damage. But they weren't damaged. They were born with that doubling. And one of these doubled die coins, also in circulated shape, worn but clearly doubled, fetched $118,000 at auction. That's right, not uncirculated, not mint state, just error-loaded. Another rare version? A 1981 quarter struck on a foreign planchette. Thinner and lighter, possibly from a coin intended for the Philippines, caused confusion when it turned up in change. Lacking full rim detail and with the lettering pushed to the edge, it looked fake. But it was real and sold for $74,000. Even more common are 1981 quarters with broad strikes, off-center strikes, or missing clad layers revealing the copper core beneath. One copper-exposed 1981 quarter with only half the reverse design visible due to an off-center strike sold for $26,000. And yes, it had definitely been circulated. And here's the kicker. Unlike many coins in this list, 1981 quarters were never included in the annual mint set for collectors. The U.S. Mint was shifting its priorities that year, and some coins, including certain Denver and San Francisco strikes, were underrepresented in collections. That means most high-grade examples were pulled randomly. Let's dive into the story of the 1983 D quarter minted in Denver, a year when mistakes, missteps, and mystery all collided. 1983 was a pivotal year for quarters. The mint, under pressure, made no special collector sets. Every single quarter went directly into circulation, millions upon millions of them, all clad, all normal. But here's the catch. Among those millions, a tiny handful were born wrong. Some were struck on defective planchets, some with double die obverse errors, causing letters to echo and shadows to jump off the coin, and some were struck on wrong metal blanks, including those meant for dimes or even foreign coins. Now, you might say, but this coin is bad, it's scratched up, corroded, and faded, how could it be worth anything? That's exactly why it's so fascinating. A particular 1983 D quarter surfaced in what experts call poor or bad condition. Heavy wear, visible nicks, and corrosion marks all over. No shine, no crisp details, just a tired coin. Yet when examined under magnification, the double die error on the obverse was unmistakable. The word Liberty doubled, the motto In God We Trust shadowed, and the date slightly thicker. Unmistakable proof it was a rare die error. And here's where the story turns into legend. Despite its condition, this coin sold for a jaw-dropping $341,000. Why? Because collectors will pay insane sums for rare errors, even when the coin looks like it's been through a war. That's the magic of 1983 D quarters, a regular, ugly coin, suddenly transformed into a treasure map. But that's not all. Some 1983 D quarters were struck on clad planchets missing a layer, exposing the copper core beneath. Others were off-center strikes, sometimes missing up to 30% of the design. One off-center 1983 D sold for $89,000, even in poor condition. And if you think that's wild, wait till you hear about the double-struck 1983 D, where the coin was struck twice in slightly different positions, creating a ghost image that looks like a coin within a coin. One of these coins in circulated condition recently sold for a staggering $132,000. Even normal 1983 D quarters, if found in uncirculated condition, can command $10,000 or more simply because no mint sets were released that year. But the errors, those numbers climb into the hundreds of thousands. So what can you do? If you spot a 1983 D quarter that looks off, doubled letters, fuzzy date, missing rims, or strange colors, don't toss it. Get it graded. Because you could be sitting on a coin worth more than your retirement fund. And as we edge closer to the grand finale of our top 10, the next coin is one that everyone wants, but almost no one has. A coin so rare, it's been called the Holy Grail of quarters. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the final mind-blowing discoveries. Let's unpack why the 1997 P quarter is the ultimate don't judge a book by its cover story. 1997 was a pretty standard year for quarters. Billions were made at the Philadelphia Mint, all clad, all ordinary, or so we thought. What collectors discovered, though, was nothing short of jaw-dropping. A very small batch of 1997 P quarters struck on experimental planchets, some containing traces of silver and other metals not authorized for circulation. These planchets came from secret testing at the Mint, tests to see if alternative metals could replace the usual copper-nickel blend. None of these were supposed to enter circulation, but enter circulation they did. One such quarter, heavily worn from years in pockets and vending machines, showed unusual weight and color differences. It lacked the familiar copper stripe on the edge and had a subtly different tint, hints of silver mixed with something else. When authenticated by experts, this coin was confirmed as one of the rarest modern experimental errors ever found. Its value? A staggering $387,000. What's even more incredible is that most people passed these coins by, thinking they were just scratched and dirty. But the metal composition told a different story, one that turned a worthless quarter into a six-figure treasure. There are also variations in the 1997 P year that include die cracks so severe they split the coin's surface, and off-center strikes missing nearly half the design. Some of these have sold for over $52,000 despite heavy wear. And although rare, some 1997 P quarters feature the elusive repunched mint mark P, a detail invisible to the casual eye but worth tens of thousands to collectors. Now, here's the real shocker. Because these coins are so new, so recent, most people don't even consider looking closely at their change. But hidden in the millions of quarters you might still find in your drawer is a coin that could buy you a brand new car, or even fund a dream vacation you never thought possible. So if you're watching this, grab those old jars, piggy banks, and coin rolls. Look for weird colors, strange edges, and anything that doesn't feel right. Even if it looks battered beyond belief, it might just be the jackpot. Remember, sometimes the most valuable treasures wear the most ordinary faces. That wraps up our countdown of the top 10 quarter dollars that shocked collectors and changed lives. If you enjoyed this journey into coin history and incredible values, don't forget to hit subscribe and ring that bell, because you never know when the next hidden treasure will pop up. Thanks for watching, and keep your eyes on the change around you. You might just hold the next big secret.